Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Guyana and the United States signed several agreements, with the South American country becoming the latest to join the U.S. in its Shiprider Agreement. This story takes the lead in a 947th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Tuesday, 22nd September 2020. Details after this important message.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. The governments of Guyana and the United States have entered a Shipriders Agreement, which will see joint patrols of Guyana's air and maritime space in an increased effort to fight the narcotics trade. More in this Capital News item with Gordon Mosley.
The agreement formed part of the discussions with President Irfan Ali and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during his visit. Under the agreement, the U.S. government will have to seek Guyana's permission for the patrols on sea and in the air. Patrols will not be conducted in Guyana's waters without that approval from Guyana. President Irfan Ali said he's pleased with the Shiprider Agreement and believes it will do more than just enhance security for Guyana's exclusive economic zone.
I am pleased to announce that Guyana and the U.S. will deepen cooperation in the area of security, with specific attention to maritime security and joint patrols, to interdict narcotics trafficking. This will also allow us to improve our technical and human capabilities in monitoring Guyana's exclusive economic zone. This augurs well for stronger collaboration and broader technical assistance to help combat both domestic and transnational organized criminal networks.
President Ali told the U.S. Secretary of State that Guyana is looking forward to continued and enhanced assistance in the fields of border control, anti-terrorism, cybersecurity, technology transfer, and anti-corruption measures. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the security agreement will ensure a more secure Guyana and Caribbean region.
Our new security agreement to counter narcotics trafficking, something that has decimated so many nations all across the world, will enter into force on Monday. Our law enforcement, American law enforcement, can now cooperate against traffickers at sea. This will make the entire region and Guyana even safer.
Mr. Pompeo said Guyana and the U.S. will continue to work in various areas of interest that will benefit both nations. The two sides also signed a framework agreement today that seeks to facilitate collaboration to identify concrete ways to further their joint interests in infrastructure, growth, integration, and energy security. Both sides believe that investors and the private sector in both Guyana and the U.S. stand to benefit from the agreement. The visit by the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo marked the first time that a sitting U.S. Secretary of State has ever visited Guyana. Mr. Pompeo assured that it will not take another 50 years for another visit to take place.
More than a year after the U.S. government formally recognized Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's interim president, Nicolas Maduro has not budged from his position as president. Maduro appears to be strengthening his power in Venezuela.
The U.S. government has been stepping up its calls for Mr. Maduro to leave office. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who is visiting the countries that border Venezuela, during a press conference this morning here in Guyana, reaffirmed the U.S. government's position that the Venezuelan leader needs to demit office.
We know that the Maduro regime has decimated the people of Venezuela, and that Maduro himself is an indicted narcotics trafficker. This means he has to leave. For the people of Venezuela to have the democracy that they need, the Cuban security forces must go, and Maduro must...
In March of this year, the U.S. government formally indicted the Venezuelan president on narcotics trafficking charges and issued a wanted bulletin for his arrest. Still, the Venezuelan leader continues to hold on to power, even as an economical crisis has forced hundreds of his citizens into Guyana seeking refugee status, and thousands more into Brazil and Colombia. The U.S. Secretary of State today praised Guyana for taking in the Venezuelan refugees and announced a $5 million donation to Guyana to assist the Venezuelans who have sought refuge in this country. While Guyana maintains its position not to interfere in the internal affairs of Venezuela, the country has supported the positions of the Organization of American States and the Lima Group, which have both been pressing for regime change in neighboring Venezuela.
The challenges posted by St. Lucia's heavy reliance on travel and tourism and how the economy should be diversified continue to occupy the minds of many of the leading local thinkers in the areas of economics and finance. Stanley Lucian of HTS News Force reports.
The diversification of St. Lucia's economy has been the holy grail for local economists, finance professionals, and thinkers for decades. Before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, travel and tourism accounted for more than 65% of the gross domestic product, an unhealthy ratio in the eyes of many, among them Richard Pitterkin, partner at Grant Thornton, who would like to see the local economy less reliant on travel and tourism.
What we don't want is to go back to what we had before. We need to change in the country. It means the need to make more investments in agriculture, in manufacturing, and in other, in digital and services. And this is a huge task that the government faces.
3.5 decades ago, St. Lucia grappled with the over-reliance on one industry. Then it was bananas. The industry later collapsed under the weight of globalization as well as homegrown challenges. And the travel and tourism industry took not only the lead, but a very dominant position.
We looked over the years to try and get into other industries. We've had problems in a number of them. The offshore thing is not as big as it used to be. The passport, we've come up with a new product, but we're not as strong as a St. Kitts and Antigua and Dominica, and so we can't. The idea is don't just go after one thing anymore. We have to reach out in a number of different sectors, different industries, but try to concentrate in the productive ones that are going to create employment, bring in foreign exchange, and give us resilience so the country can grow in the long run. How successful they are really will depend on the policies over the next 6 months.
But what of the one-time leader, the agricultural sector? Can it be revived to its rightful place as a major pillar of the economy? Stanley Lucian for the HTS News Force.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
Over in Trinidad and Tobago, opposition leader Kamla Persad-Bissessar is urging the government not to reintroduce the property tax at this time due to the economic impact of COVID-19. Jewel Brown of TV6 News has some details.
In a statement on her Facebook page, opposition leader Kamla Persad-Bissessar called on the government to, quote, rethink its position on implementing the property tax at this time, end quote. The opposition leader said people are suffering enough due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the accompanying economic fallout, and now is not the time to add to the burden of the citizenry. During Thursday's post-cabinet news conference, Finance Minister Colm Umbert did not say whether the government would or would not implement the property tax in fiscal 2021. This was how he responded to a question from TV6 News about the roadmap to recovery from COVID-19 committee's recommendation that the property tax be implemented as part of the acceleration of measures to enhance revenues in the short term.
I wouldn't want to comment on that at this time. But we had committed in our manifesto to continue with the Revenue Authority and the property tax system. That's there in black and white. We didn't hide from anybody with that. I mean, we put it there that we were doing the valuations of properties and preparing the valuation rules in order to allow the implementation of that particular tax. And also we were continuing our work on the Revenue Authority. So it's not a secret.
Mrs. Persad-Bissessar noted that another one of the government's major revenue-generating ideas has been to form the Revenue Authority to collect as much tax revenue as possible. The Property Tax Act was passed during a previous PNM administration in 2009, but did not take effect by the time the UNC-led People's Partnership Administration, which Mrs. Prasad Besessa led, won the 2010 general election. The PP administration did not implement the property tax during its term in office from 2010 to 2015. The PNM administration, led by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, has made efforts to implement the tax since it won its first term in office in 2015. Mrs. Prasad Besessa said close to 100,000 citizens lost their jobs over the past 5 years, and even more have become unemployed with the difficult economic environment in the past few months. She also said persons who are renting have complained of the slow pace of approvals for rent relief, while others are constrained with mortgage payments. Minister Imbert reiterated on Thursday that the government is facing a $15.5 billion deficit due to the economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis, which has resulted in a significant reduction in all forms of taxes since March.
We have to be very, very, very careful about any reduction in tax collection, because what that does, it prevents us from doing the very things that the businesses need to survive, to keep the cost of goods and services at a reasonable rate and all that sort of thing. So it's easy to say, but not easy to do.
Mrs. Prasad Besessa is urging the government to have a heart and spare the people additional hardship of property taxes, as she said families are now worried about their future if they are forced to scrape together funds to pay property tax. She said by allowing citizens to keep more of their money by not implementing the property tax, people will have more resources to reinvest into the economy. Jewel Brown, TV6 News.
Over 250 prison officers in Trinidad and Tobago are in quarantine at this time. The startling revelation comes directly from the prison's commissioner, Dennis Pulchan, who is denying any speculation that this is due to the prison's environment. Renessa Cutting of TV6 News reports.
The prisons are known for cramped and poorly ventilated conditions, but Prisons Commissioner Dennis Pulchan says that is not a factor in this equation.
No, I don't think conditions in a prison can cause COVID. COVID is a virus that could cause, it's a virus that will cause, but not from the prison actually. Prison officers go to their normal life and they leave the prison, and they go to the groceries, they go to the markets, you know. They go to shopping malls, they interact with people. So, and there's community spread. So, one really do not know who may have the COVID virus out there.
This as over 250 officers are now in quarantine.
I have 254 officers right now quarantined.
I just wanted to clarify, those are not all positive, those are like contacts of positive patients and stuff like that.
No. The number that I quoted on our office are people who are quarantined, who would have contact other people with flu-like symptoms and are given the 14 days to stay home.
The commissioner says at last count, there were about 36 actual positive COVID cases among his officers. Regardless, the situation has left a significant dent in his workforce.
There are officers who are doubling up on their shifts, giving of themselves to ensure the security and safety of the prison, of the nation's prison, right? And also the welfare of the inmates. Because when an inmate gets sick in the prison, it's our officers who take them to the hospital to get medical treatments.
Have you had any inmates testing positive for COVID?
We have, out of 3,800 inmates, we have 5 inmates tested positive so far. 2 have recovered. So we have 3 isolated in Cora Hospital. So we did a pretty good job in trying to keep it out and protect the inmates.
The commissioner says the prison service has a very stringent approach to COVID-19, and he assures the service is doing the necessary to prevent spread within the prison walls. Renessa Cutting, TV6 News.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.